In the last part, I talked about how I had nearly solved all of my problems that I'd been having building this studio, and I was only left with one. A little bit of noise that had crept in. Actually, rather a lot of noise that had crept in. Okay, so this is my first dry run with everything set up, and it was frustrating me because I didn't know where it was coming from. I mean, my first hunch was that it was a ground loop. I'll come back to that. But I just didn't understand it because I'd used this camcorder with this tie clip microphone to make a little clip promoting an event that I was involved with. Hi, I'm Jamie Nemeth. I'm the organiser of this year's and last year's Fiddle Festival of Wales. And there was no noise. Well, there was a little bit of noise, but it was nothing that I couldn't iron out, and it was barely noticeable. And I seemed to forget that entirely when it came to doing all of this, because what happened was I plugged this tie clip microphone in with this extension lead, as I talked about in a previous part, and then I read online that someone else had been having the same problems, so I thought anyway, and they said that the solution they'd found was to take their camera away from all sources of electromagnetic interference. The problem is I didn't know what the source was, and I thought, well, that's not really a solution for me because I've got all these lights set up. It turns out it wasn't the lights, but I've got all these lights set up, and if the solution to reducing the noise is to take it away from everything I've got set up, well, what was the point of buying all of this stuff? Testing the mic outside. So, no, that wasn't a solution for me. I had to find another solution. And as I say, my first hunch was it's a ground loop. So the first thing I did was I thought, right, well, we can test if it's a ground loop, remove the mains from this, run it off battery, and see what happens. And the noise was still there. Again, I seem to completely forget about the time before where I used this tie clip microphone and this camcorder and everything was absolutely fine with no noise at all. The noise was there now. And that's because I'd missed something. Because you see, there was something else plugged in that I'd completely forgotten about. And it was this. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. I love this. This is a great find on eBay. And there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. But what I'd forgotten was that whilst this might not have been plugged in anymore to the ground, to the mains, this still was. And that shouldn't matter, because this is independent. This was independently plugged in by a mains adapter. And there's no connection between this and the camcorder. Or is there? You see, because this was actually plugged in via an AV lead into the camcorder. So even though I'd isolated this from the ground, this was causing another ground. And I think that's where the ground loop was coming from. I'm not an expert in ground loops. I know very little about them, even though I've done a lot of physics. I sort of get the concept of them, but I think that's where the ground loop was being caused. So essentially a ground loop, if my understanding is correct, is that you know electronics need an idea of what ground is, what 0 volts is, and by disconnecting the camcorder it's got its own idea of what ground is that it's getting somehow internally from the battery, and this is connected to the mains, which is giving it another idea of what ground is, except in reality it's not connected to the mains, it's floating ground because this pin on the mains adapter is plastic. But also then any noise that's introduced kind of interferes with the electronics and it gets somehow amplified through the ground loop, because once your ground reference, the thing that's meant to be 0 volts and nothing else but 0 volts, once that starts to wobble, everything else in the system starts to wobble, and it creates audible noise. And yeah, it's got no actual ground reference to go off, so everything's sort of bobbing about, and it's got its own idea of where 0 volts is. And not to mention that, but this was producing audible noise on its own. This is brand new, but I plugged it in and I could hear the noise it was making without going through the headphones. So I don't know, that must have been what was causing such a loud noise, I think. But the ground loop wasn't helping matters at all. So I only realised that, really, once I was unplugging this after one of my many tests, and just like, I don't understand how I can't eliminate this noise. And when I touched the ground of the outside of one of the cables, the noise disappeared off the screen. I could see the gauges go right down to 0, and I went, oh, that's weird. That hasn't happened before. left go of the cable, noise came back. Grabbed onto it, it disappeared again.
Now here's an interesting test. If I hold the lens, on the metal part of the lens, the gauges go right down to 0 with the tie clip mic.
I thought, no, it can't be a ground loop. I've already dismissed the ground loop. It can't be a ground loop after all that. And it was. So here's the latest harebrained plan. Firstly, you can help yourself not pick up RF interference and all that sort of stuff by reducing the length of the cable. So this long AV lead that's been lying around, we're going to attack it from 2 angles. That's going to be replaced by this 20cm one. And then I thought, well, one way to make absolutely sure that there's no connection to the ground is to make sure that there's no connection to the mains whatsoever. So I reckon we're going to use the camcorder on battery only. It won't be connected to the mains at all. Of course, we know there's a bridge between the camcorder and the screen via the AV lead, albeit now shorter. So I twigged that this screen has quite a wide range of power that it can run over. I phrase that as a proper sentence, but it's designed for a car that runs 12 volts, but it's actually rated for 9 to 36 volts, and it won't complain if you put 36 volts in, which is quite incredible for something that's designed for 12 volts. But the lower bound of that, 9 volts, something else that's 9 volts, your bog standard 9 volt square battery, so called. I've always found it strange that they're called square batteries because it's a rectangle. Then you have square TVs and they're rectangles too. So we're going to try that, and we're going to connect the square battery with one of these, which is just the the clip that you get on old radios and things, but they're perfectly widespread in other things as well. Just clip that to the battery. That plugs into the screen, and then the whole thing will be electrically isolated from the ground. So we're going to try that. Okay, this is going to look completely weird because I've just got the room light on, I've got a really low shutter speed on. This is purely just a sound test. If this has got rid of the noise with the little field monitor plugged into the 9 volt battery and the camcorder running off its own battery, then this will be a success. What do you think, editing sweet Jamie? Okay, this is going to look completely weird because I've just got the room light on, I've got a really low shutter speed on. This is purely just a sound test. If this has got rid of the noise with the little field monitor plugged into the 9 volt battery and the camcorder running off its own battery, then this will be a success. What do you think, editing sweet Jamie?